Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m., join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. Welcome, everyone. In this episode, we're going to take a look at a very personal and introspective album from 1981 that features a hit song that has recently seen a major resurgence in popularity and exposure due to a slew of those reaction videos that you see posted all over YouTube. We're going to talk about the song, we're going to talk about the album that it's from, and also how many millions of views this reaction video has gotten. Stay tuned.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Erik Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff. And Erik, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome to the 3324 podcast. My name is Dean. I'm here with Erik.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. We're going to be talking about that album, like we said, from 1981. And it is the debut album from Phil Collins called Face Value. So what we're going to do is we're going to get you set up with some of the vital stats. So you got a little background on the album, and then we'll go from there. So came out in 1981, and the chart performance, it hit number 7 on the Billboard charts. So definitely a top 10 release. Mm-hmm. Not too bad.
Number 1 in the UK and Canada.
Yeah.
So not too shabby there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Overseas. Again, he's from England. So, and it spawned 2 hits. And oddly, I love this kind of a statistic that I'm going to give you. Is I love when albums or chart hits like hit the same number. It's I find it really strange. But in this case, there was 2 singles released from this album. Right. It was In the Air Tonight and I Missed Again were the 2 singles. They both hit number 19. I always find that weird.
Yeah.
Like how how do they both land on the same number? One couldn't go 1 more or one couldn't go 1 less.
Right. It did, oddly enough, it in the Billboard, I think it was the top 200, it peaked at 19, but on the rock charts, In the Air Tonight would reach number 2. So the FM radio, I mean, it was heavy airplay with this song, and we'll get into that in a few minutes.
Yep.
So, yep.
Yeah, and then the album sales, I mean, currently it's 5 times platinum. So that's, a platinum is 1 million. So it went 5 over, and it actually reached that milestone in 1999. So this was not a 5 million out of the gate album, but, it did hit it. And then the final stat we're going to leave you with, it was produced by Phil Collins with Hugh Padgham assisting, which we'll also probably get onto also. So there's your vital stats. You've got a little background about the nuts and bolts of it. So I'm going to lay this album at your feet because I was certainly not into Phil Collins. I was certainly not into Genesis. So really the only reason I got into Phil Collins / Genesis was because of you.
Yeah. Came at exactly, I think it was Abacab that actually I got into first. I heard it. Certainly there was some airplay from some of the tracks from that album. Actually, 2 of the tracks that didn't make the album was played constantly on WNEW, which I loved, which was Paper Late. And a song called You Might Recall, which is one of my favorite tracks. Yeah, Face Value came to me fairly early on. I was 14. This album really, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I really enjoyed out the gate how personal it was. And at that point, for me, music was more about sound. It was more about melody. It was more about, interesting drum sounds and that kind of thing. But this is probably one of the first albums in my youth where I actually cared about what the songs had to say, lyric wise. And this is an album about, divorce. It's about, a lot of stuff was going on, and Phil's at this point, I really didn't know that at the time. He was going through a divorce, and this was the first time he actually seriously wrote some songs.
Yeah.
They were love letters to his wife. They were, conversations, like phone conversations that he was having. A little bit of backstory here is, Phil was the drummer for Genesis, when Peter Gabriel was the vocalist, and then in 1975, Peter Gabriel left the band. Phil took over on lead vocals, but still at that point was not really writing songs himself. It was mostly Mike and Tony and guitarist Steve Hackett. And Phil really never felt like this was me. Like, he would sing the songs, but he only cared about how the song sounded with his voice and that kind of thing. So in 1978, there was an album called And Then There Were Three, when Steve Hackett left the band and Mike took over on all the guitar duties, and it was just a trio. That's when he was having problems with his wife, because there was a major tour for that album and his wife wouldn't have it. He goes, if you go on this tour, I am not going to be there when you get back. And Phil actually, and she took the kids, moved to Vancouver, Canada. And Phil basically said to Mike and Tony, look, I have to do this. I have to move there. I have to see if I can salvage my marriage. They let him go. In the interim, it gave them opportunity to record some solo work as well. Things obviously didn't work out. He tried to move back to England, and it was that point where he was to bring the wife back with the kids, and things just fell apart from there. And, it was that point when he was actually, jotting down songs and recording them in his attic studio with his little 8-track machine.
Yep.
And that's where a lot of these songs were born.
And you were really, really into him back in the day. I mean, that was really what kind of piqued my interest. Is I had my own thing going. I had stuff that I was into. Yeah. And then, like, out of nowhere, I didn't really know anything about Phil Collins or Genesis. And you just really kind of picked up on it and was really kind of exposing me to it. So by the time I had quote unquote gotten into Phil Collins, I think it was when his second album came out, when Hello, I Must Be Going. I remember getting that on cassette. I think I remember that, like, getting it at Sam Goody.
Yeah.
And I devoured that album. I was like, wow, like that was for me, like my first real introduction to him as a solo artist. And then I did, like, what I call, like, the second album backtrack. Like, then I went back to the first album. And thankfully, the second album was enough like the first that it was very easy to consume. There wasn't this big, like, different change in style or different change in sound. It was an enhancement, but to be able to go back to that first album was a real treat and something that was really special. So, with your influence and then me finally getting into it, because I certainly was by no means into Genesis either until I got exposed to that through you. Mm-hmm. Like you said, Abacab, and right around all that time, there was so much material that was coming out from either Phil Collins or Genesis that really there was a lot to pick, and it was very different also. So it wasn't like listening to Genesis was like listening to Phil Collins, although there was some similarities. That the solo stuff really was the outlet for him to express himself. Right.
Well, this album was really a departure from what Genesis was doing up to that point. I mean, they were still very, very prog, long-winded, soloing and sort of these, talking about, like, magical creatures in the woods and that kind of thing, which that to me was my, as a kid, that was my escape. I would escape, in with my headphones and escape in my room and just listen to this weird, I loved all the prog rock groups of the day, Pink Floyd, Genesis, Yes, King Crimson, ELP, so I was really taken. But with Genesis, I found there was something unique about their music in the sense that they had very, very strong melodic hooks to their music. It wasn't sort of like them playing over one another, bombastic, like these long virtuistic, kind of things like the other guys were doing. They were really respectful of one another and how they managed to kind of, work together. all of a sudden this guy comes out with this album that is very R&B influenced. There's a lot. It's so eclectic. It is remarkably eclectic. It's pretty much all the things that Phil Collins likes. Okay, this is you get a sense of what he was into as growing up, and so there's Beatles influence on this album. There's the R&B. There's slight sort of Motown. There might be, and there is some prog on here as well. In the Air Tonight, his rendition of Tomorrow Never Knows. They both anchored the album. Those that has those prog influence on him. Working with Brian Eno, working with Peter Gabriel on his solo record.
Yeah, so let's talk about Peter Gabriel real quick.
Yeah, okay.
I actually want to jump back to the history when you were talking about how Peter Gabriel, a lot of people only know Peter Gabriel as a solo artist and as, Sledgehammer and Red Rain and In Your Eyes and all that kind of stuff. But as the lead singer of Genesis, he kind of drove the look of the band. He really was literally the front man who would really dress up in different costumes and
yes.
play different characters. So I think I read somewhere back in the day that when Peter Gabriel did leave and Genesis was starting to search for a new singer, mm-hmm. Phil Collins was kind of filling in reluctantly, kind of singing the songs. And there, right. And I think the story went, I think I read, is that they were saying like Phil Collins sounds more like Peter Gabriel than Peter Gabriel sounded like him. Like their voices were very similar, but not a copy, where he was able to emulate the style and the intent of Peter Gabriel without sounding exactly like him.
Phil did a lot of backing vocals on those albums as well. So he was already a singer. I mean, he was singing. He even sang lead in a couple of tracks. But yeah, you're right. He was like, I'm just the drummer. He was actually joking with the band saying we should just carry on as an instrumental band. And they kind of were like, what? No, that's not going to happen. So he kind of felt like, so I guess they auditioned quite a few singers. He was not the first choice. And I think it might have been, I think I heard a story. It was Steve Hackett really prompted, Tony and Mike rather, to hire him as the singer. And John Anderson of Yes also had a little bit of a contribution there, because he recommended Phil. He goes, he's got a beautiful voice. You guys should go with Phil Collins.
Yeah. And you know
that's how it went.
That certainly makes it a lot easier for a band, because you don't have to worry about auditioning. You don't have to worry about the guy learning the stuff. You don't have to worry about, right, are we going to get along with him? Is this new guy a jerk? Or, we've been together so long. So it's really fortuitous for Genesis
yes.
that, they were able to quote unquote promote from within, the guy that was in the back gets promoted to the front man. So it kind of worked. You don't really see stuff like that happening. Usually when bands go through that, they replace a singer. They get someone else like Van Halen. They get Sammy Hagar or AC/DC. They get Brian Johnson. It's a replacement, not a promotion.
Yeah, right.
So I thought that was great for them.
I absolutely. I don't know if you could call it. I mean, they were now challenged with a whole new set of things they in the live setting. He certainly couldn't sit behind the drum kit. He had to be the front man now. And that's something that I think he wasn't really used to in that sense. So he had to kind of develop his own sort of performing style. He was not going to wear the costumes like Peter Gabriel did. He was not going to be that. So, the stage presentation changed when Phil took over. And they had to get another drummer. They had to have somebody to fill in and we know who that was. So, Mr. Chester Thompson.
Mr. Chester Thompson, right? Because you, me, and another friend of ours chased Chester Thompson down an alley after a Phil Collins show. We saw.
That's right, Radio City. Yep.
We saw Phil Collins at Radio City with the Hot Tub Club. So that was his No Jacket Required tour.
Yeah.
And we left, and I don't even remember how we went around the back. I don't even know where the back of Radio City is to find it.
Right.
But we were somehow around the back, and I forgot. I don't know if it was you or our friend Johnny. He's like, "Oh my God, there's Chester Thompson." He was walking down the street like just some guy, because he's really not really known.
Right.
And we're running out. We just start running out. Like 3 guys just start running down the street after this guy. Like Chester.
Yes.
And he stopped and he signed our ticket stubs. So that was I'll never forget that the Chester Thompson.
I actually got the entire band. Of course I didn't get Phil Collins' autograph, but I got the whole band. I think I still have the tour program somewhere. So Chester Thompson, steeped in. His background is a lot of jazz fusion. Yep. Played with Weather Report for a while. So the chemistry was there because Phil, his drumming style brought something to Genesis that really perked the music up. It gave them a groove. It gave them more of a sort of a jazzier feel. And, they have really appreciated that in Phil, when they hired him on. So the chemistry was there between him and Chester, and the stage presentation, the whole dynamic changed when you had 2 drummers, because Phil would still play. I mean, there were times when he just, do his thing, run behind the drum kit, and then they go off on these like drum duets, and it was amazing. That was just, for me, the best part of the show, is to watch them both go at it and that kind of thing. So
let's set the stage for this album.
Yeah. Right.
So we've got what Phil Collins was steeped in and where he was coming from. Mm-hmm. And previous to this, right, this was his first solo album. So the previous release to this was a Genesis album called Duke, which came out in 1980.
Yes.
And there is going to, Duke will play just a little bit of a part in Phil Collins' solo album, because there is a song from Duke that Phil Collins decided to redo for his album. And obviously the Genesis version was very Genesis, and which is nothing wrong. It's actually not very Genesis. It's in the Genesis style. But then Phil Collins takes it and he adapts it to what he is going through or what kind of musical journey he's going on, which is very different from what Genesis was doing. And that song is
Behind the Lines.
Okay, so you can.
The story is that they were going through some tracks. They were cleaning up, some of the stuff that they were working on. In certain cases, they were like rewinding the tapes and that kind of thing. So they sped up the song on the tape and they listened to it and they played it. And they were like, wait a minute, that sounds pretty good. Let's play that back. And they played it at high speed. So it had those punchy, sort of grooves of it. And they even Mike Rutherford, says that was really cool. So Phil took that and did this sort of jazzier version of it, and he added the horn section from Earth, Wind, and Fire, and that was a big deal. So
So there's something neat. There's something neat that everybody can do is go on Spotify or wherever you get your music. Go, look up Duke by Genesis. Listen to that one first. Maybe listen to that one first before you listen to this album. And you can kind of, there's nothing. It's like a 5-minute song, but the beginning part is mainly instrumental, kind of almost like an instrumental build up to the actual song. So it fits with the song because the instrumental stuff is in the vein of the key and everything. So it's not something weird and then the song starts. It really does flow into it. Right. And then when you get into when you listen to Face Value. You'll hear what Erik is talking about, how it's definitely sped up, but it's not fast. It's not like Chipmunky, but it's just a different tempo and a totally different vibe, which that vibe is kind of something that really flows throughout this album. Mm-hmm. And it's something that it really, which grabbed me about this album is the vibe. So let's get into it.
Okay. So, getting back to Duke, I have to point out too that there were 2 other songs on Duke that Phil actually wrote for the first time. Misunderstanding was the hit from that record, which if you listen to Misunderstanding sounds nothing like the rest of the album. It's almost sort of a funky, to me, it sounds, he lifted the line, it's a Sly and the Family Stone, Hot Fun in the Summertime. That's what it sounds like to me. How he even got away with it, because to me, the bass line in that is exactly the same. So I don't, he never got in trouble for it or nothing, but to me, it sounds exactly this, alike. So that was a song that was recorded as a home demo at that point, he didn't even know he was even making a solo record. He always wanted to, But that became one of the songs that he actually introduced to the rest of the, to Tony and Mike, and they liked that one, so they picked that one for Duke. And there's a song called "Please Don't Ask," which is possibly his most personal song, and it's a ballad, and it's just talking about his wife and his kids and missing his kids. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. I urge, if you guys check that one out as well. It's a gorgeous ballad. Probably one of my favorites that he's ever done. And he's done a lot. So The story goes too, is that he did play "In the Air Tonight" for them, but Phil says, no, I did not play that for them. Tony says, yes, you did. Oh, I'm sorry. No, Phil says he did play it for him, and Tony says no, because if I had heard the song, we would have used that song for Genesis.
So a little conflicting memories on that.
Right.
This is the lead up, is his divorce from his first wife, or the troubles they were going through it, which would lead to divorce. Mm-hmm. And this was really Phil Collins' therapy and his catharsis to get through this. Yes. And when you listen to this album, when I first listened to it when it came out, and when I would get into it, I didn't really connect to it on that level. When I went to go listen to it now, and we're going to talk about a song that actually gave me chills when I heard it, but it's probably not one of the songs you would think. I think when you give it a listen, you really want to kind of pay attention. It's not, some of the stuff's overt and some of the stuff is not so much, but you can really hear much different than the way his career would go. I'm glad this was his first album, because Absolutely. it got the serious listening to that it deserved, because as his career went on, he kind of, the overexposure took hold, and it was harder for people to really kind of take him seriously. So, this album is really a good statement, and really him really striking out on his own.
Yeah, there is a sincerity to this record for his debut, that it's honest. It's his most honest piece of work. He would go on to do the same type of thing, and it just wouldn't feel quite the same. At least for me. This, for me, is the only album, that I truly listen to. I don't really listen to much of his later stuff. I mean, but even with those albums, there's always you can always count on at least one or two really good songs off of those records. So you can just make a great playlist of Phil Collins material. But this album, every song, I can't. There's not a bad song on the record at all. Okay. Like I said before, and at an age of 14, why am I listening to this album? About divorce and all this stuff. Why did it appeal to me? I have no idea. I really don't. Some people say that I have an old soul kind of thing going on. I don't know, but it's so why wasn't I listening punk rock? I was listening to this album, and it really, I really took to it. I have a really good soft spot for it. So.
Yeah, and it's not a difficult listen, but it will challenge you. So there's a difference between something difficult and something challenging you.
Yeah.
Let's kind of get the elephant in the room out of the way, and that's in the Air Tonight. Okay, everybody knows this song. Everybody plays air drums to it. It's part of the psyche, and it's part, and especially now more than ever. And we'll talk about the reaction videos a little later. But it's kind of the way I looked at this, and the way I look at it now is listening to "In the Air Tonight" certainly does not encapsulate this album whatsoever, because it's nothing like that in my mind. What this is like, listening only to "In the Air Tonight" on this album, is kind of like ringing the doorbell of someone's house but never going inside. You need to get past this song to really see everything else that's behind it, because it really is. There's so much other stuff that is behind it, that this song is so big that it almost eclipses everything and makes everything else seem a little less, but it's not. There's so much other stuff in there that's going on. So, absolutely. So yeah, "In the Air Tonight" is going to be the opening track. We all know it. Phil Collins didn't kill somebody. Somebody wasn't drowning. Phil Collins didn't push a guy into the river, or whatever or these urban legends are. If that happened and he confessed to it, I don't know that he'd still be around if he did that. And I'm sure somebody would have known that a rock star killed somebody and drowned them and pushed them in the water, or whatever it was.
He's at the time. The story is that, I mean, obviously he was bitter. It's a bitter song. It is, there's, as he would put it, there's menace to it, but he pretty much improvised the lyrics. And he's very proud of that, actually. When he was like recording the demo, 99% of those lyrics, he just made up on the spot. So when people ask him, what's the song about? He's like, I have no idea. That's his answer. I have no idea what the song's about. It was spontaneous. It was, and I'm proud of it, but I have no clue as to what it's about. But there's bitterness. There is, definitely it's more of the mood of the song than the lyrics, that really sort of matches what's to come on the record in terms of his personal feelings and that kind of thing. So,
yeah. And the funny thing about this is when I went to go listen to this recently, just for the show, I put it on and I'm listening to it through my speakers, and I didn't even get halfway through In the Air Tonight. And for some reason, I don't know why, I turned it off. I'm like, I need to listen to this with my headphones on, not because I wanted to hear In the Air Tonight with, I don't know what there was. It was something compelling me. I said, put the headphones on and go like somewhere quiet.
Thank you.
And listen to it. And it's,
turn the lights off.
And I'm telling you, it had this, listening to it had an effect on me in a weird way, because I've heard this album dozens, however many times, but I actually got chills at different parts of this album because I just let myself kind of go for the ride on it. I wasn't trying to like think about the next song or think about what was coming next because I knew what was coming next. I just kind of like was really as close as I've ever come to having something as be a fresh listen, which was amazing. Yeah. So you get through In the Air Tonight, and then the second song is so important because, like I said, if In the Air Tonight is the doorbell, This Must Be Love, which is the second song, is going into the house. And the thing I love about this album is the bass playing. There is such great, clear bass playing on this, and you can really enjoy. I really enjoy listening to this album for the lyrical content, but also for what Phil Collins was able to pull off on his first album, of such a complete thought of what the feel he was going for. And This Must Be Love. I think This Must Be Love probably encapsulates this album better than In the Air Tonight.
Yeah, I'll agree to that. And it's a positive song. It's like one of the only songs that it's actually about him finding a new love. So when you say, entering the house, so to speak, it's a welcome. That's like the greeting. That's like, hey, welcome to my house kind of thing. Let me get your drink. Let's sit down and, hey, and then you laugh a little, but yeah, that definitely has that vibe, and the great groove by Alphonso Johnson on bass on that song.
Yeah. And that was what, a really smart move by Phil Collins was getting pros to do this. He knew what he knew who he needed for this, and he got some jazz musicians that he needed, and he really filled out the band and who he used to get this type of a sound. You're not going to get those types of bass lines with a rock bassist. You're just not going to, So the fact that he was able to kind of get those musicians and transpose it onto what he was doing I think is a triumph.
Well, it's a testament to him as well that he actually, some of these people he actually knew, he actually met. He was a big fan of Weather Report. He wanted to impress Joe Zawinul with some of the stuff on this record. And,
Joe Zawinul is the leader of Weather Report. For those who are not into the whole jazz fusion thing.
So he was looking to impress some people, but the fact that he even knew some of these people is wild to me, because Genesis at that point had a fan base. They were big on the prog circuit, but they weren't making hit records. They weren't like huge in the sense that they were such a big band in the sense of of making like top 10 records and that kind of thing.
And having all those connections that you would think they have. You know what it is though? I think we're leaving a little something out. I'm just gonna skip back really quick to like 1975, that era. Phil Collins was also in Brand X. So
which was
some
a
of
jazz
that
fusion band.
Yeah. So some of that might have come. Some of that exposure might have been coming from that. So this, not only was he in Genesis, he was in Brand X, which is like a jazz fusion thing, and then he's doing his solo thing. So that maybe some of that exposure and some of those connections came from there. And then he was able to cash in on it. So now skipping back. So next up after This Must Be Love, which is just a really, it's just an easy listen. It's just so simple.
It's light, it's breezy.
Yeah. It's a simple melodic line, and it just kind of gets you going.
And great singer-songwriter, Stephen Bishop, for those of you, he had a hit On and On in the late 70s. Was it 79, 80, around that time?
I think so.
Yeah. Tremendous voice. I mean, the really high falsetto type of voice, singing background vocals on this, and him and Phil going, harmonizing those high end vocals was amazing. Which, by the way, would happen a lot on this album with Phil singing like falsetto backing vocals. Who does that? Yeah. Who chooses to do like a high pitched voice to sing backing vocals? It's a lot of the songs are like that. So yeah, but yeah. So great track.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like I said, it's there's a lot there for everybody. And then Behind the Lines, which we talked about, which is a remake of a track from Duke, sped up, meaning again, not chipmunky, but really brought up tempo, and really he R&B'd it. He sold it up a little. Like it really sounds. It's a sound. It definitely sounds like something like a Motown track.
Yeah.
And it's just got this like buoyancy to it. Really kind of like it's really kind of the version from Duke was just kind of a straight up, we'll for lack of a better term, we'll call it more poppy for Genesis, and there's nothing wrong with that, very accessible. But this one really has a totally different flavor to it. The lyrics are the same. He didn't change anything about it, just really the arrangement, and it's like a totally different song.
The arrangement, he brought, like we mentioned before, he brought in the horn section for Earth, Wind and Fire. They're known as the Phoenix horns. Tom Washington is the arranger for that horn section. He brought him in. Phil would write down the sort of the groove, like he in dots, like little, like almost like Morse code, like and present it to Tom. This is what I want the horns to play, and they did exactly that. Yeah. And they were all like amazed that Phil had the ear to sit down and really work this out in his head, and he got exactly what he wanted from them. It wasn't heavily labored over. It wasn't, they just came in and did it. And that's amazing. The song, to me, the song it sounds like a jazz, an R&B song. To me, there's nothing phony about it. Some people might think, oh, it's Phil Collins, so it's not as, it's not the real deal kind of thing. But for me, it is the real deal. It's amazing. He would continue. He would continue that relationship with the Phoenix Horns through a while, and he did get some flack for it, for quote unquote stealing the Earth, Wind and Fire sound. But you know what? You got to go with what you want, and if they're willing to do it, he didn't steal anything. It's not like he kidnapped them and held them for ransom. So good on him, and it really works, and it'll come up through this album. So then the next song, and the thing is, a lot of these songs kind of fade into each other, that there's not really any gap, so you really kind of get an experience of one song drifting into another, which kind of keeps you engaged. And that leads into The Roof Is Leaking, which is really kind of a slow song. It's really a serious track. It was meant to be, he wanted to evoke a sort of like bluesy kind of. The odd thing about Phil Collins, I learned years later, is that he is a huge fan of like frontier life, like the Wild West, and he's like, I think he's got one of the biggest collections of Alamo memorabilia, oddly enough. So the song evokes hardship and the winter, on the farm and that kind of thing, and he wanted to kind of get a kind of a bluesy kind of a feel for it. So he had none other than Eric Clapton come in to play slide dobro on the song, on the original track. However, as Eric was doing back in those days, I mean, he came in drunk. The story goes that he came in drunk. Phil wanted it done in one take. It was going to be like just simple. He put Eric through his paces with that, trying to get it right. And because he tried to get it right so many times, he ended up not using Eric at all. He brought in another slide player named Joe Partridge to play on the song, and Daryl Sturmer, who would become another member of Genesis. When they went trio, he was another person they hired. He's the guitarist, another jazz player and he played banjo on the track. So he wanted that sort of precise, feel to it. Looking back on it, I think he was going over, if you watch the classic album series, if you're familiar with those videos back in the day, like the late 90s, you could find them on YouTube. I think they're actually on Prime, Amazon Prime, quite a few of them. He's actually sitting there with Hugh Padgham and going through the track, and they found that original version with Erik, and it just I could only wish that was put on the album, because that dobro was, and he goes, in retrospect, this is what it should have been.
Should have kept it.
Should have kept it.
Yeah, maybe on a super ultra special deluxe version. Because,
I think
there's never any definitive version of anything that comes out anymore. So
I think in 2016, with the re-release of the record, there is a demo. I don't know if it's that version or not, because it's so muddy. Yeah. So I don't know. So
so I'm sure someone can do something with it. Mm-hmm. So then that song, "Roof is Leaking," leads into "Droned," which is really kind of a short, pretty much an instrumental, but it's so short. It's almost like a placeholder for what's about to come. Which is my favorite track on the album, and it's an instrumental. I mean, it's got vocalizations in it, but there's no singing per se. There's no singing of lyrics. There's a couple of different children's choirs that were used. The name of the song is "Hand in Hand," and I absolutely love this song. And when I was laying down listening to this, the children's choir kind of just sings this same kind of melodic line over and over with a bunch of lahs and whatnot. When they did it the second time, for some reason I wasn't prepared for it, or I was really receptive to it, and I literally got chills down my spine. I was like, oh my God, it's an upbeat instrumental. It's got the horns on it. It's got Phil just playing the drums, and just a really band effort. And yeah, it's not progressive. It's not like it's not like always doing a little Genesis thing. It's just an amazing song. And for some reason, I latched onto this over every other track on the album when I heard it. There was something about "Hand in Hand" that excited me then. And I'm glad to say, all these years later, when I heard it, it literally gave me chills. And I was so happy. I actually had a little bit of an emotional reaction that I was able to kind of experience a song again like that, almost for the first time.
Yeah. Well, it's never lost its appeal for me. One of the great drum performances on this song too. It's so sublime.
Yeah, you could just tell they're just cooking on this song. I mean, it's like it like you could feel it. You could feel them kind of. It starts out a little slow, meaning just with a little kind of little beat, and it builds up, and the choir comes in, and the children are singing, and then the horns kick in. But by the time this song gets cooking, they're really like, it's like a train that's not stopping, because everybody's just kind of into it. The vocals are going on. I'm getting excited just talking about it. I'm getting tingly. Like, the vocals are going, the horns are going, the drums are going. I mean, everybody's just in sync and just kind of moving this song along, Yeah. And then it gets the perfect second song after it, which is "I Missed Again." Just want to take a quick moment and thank you for listening. Your support means so much to Erik and I. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please subscribe. It would be awesome. And if you're using Apple Podcasts, a rating and review would be doubly awesome. And your feedback is invaluable. So let's keep the conversation going on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 Podcast. You can let us know how we're doing. If you have any requests, you can post them there. Or if you just want to talk about one of the episodes or ask a question, we'd love to interact with you, and we absolutely look forward to it. Thanks. Let's get back to the show. This was the second song that also hit number 19 in addition to "In the Air Tonight." So if you're a numbers person, you could say that this was as good as "In the Air Tonight" as far as chart performance, right?
Yeah.
It charted the same if you're going to go that route. "I Missed Again" is again another one of those horn. He just keeps this groove going is what it is. He was really able to sustain it throughout this album.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking at it from the vinyl standpoint, it's the first song on side 2. Yep. So you turn it over and right out the gate, it happens again. Like, you leave with "Hand in Hand," and there it is. Tremendous. Yeah. It starts off with this sort of that classic Motown drum intro, and his influence is there. All the stuff that he loves is there. The music. Very, very strong Black American music on this album. I mean, it's just his love for that kind of music is so strong. I think it kind of raised some eyebrows, and I think there was some stories that people, black stations at the time didn't really want to play the stuff, and there was this sort of he got some heat for having the horns on. Yep. And Hugh Padgham points out in that classic album's video that it's amazing to him that people still had these kinds of problems with that back in the day. Like when you're a kid, you don't think about this kind of stuff crossing over and that kind of thing. It's just great that he has all these great musicians. That's all I cared about. I didn't care who was black, who was white, who were, whatever. It's just a testament to, his love for just music in general. I mean, and that would carry over to, other artists as well. So, but moving on to the next track.
Yeah, is You Know What I Mean, which does slow down the tempo a little bit. So really and I think the song, the track order is really important, right? Because you said Hand in Hand kind of closes out the first side if we're talking about an album or cassette on a high note. And yeah, that momentum is carried through in I Missed Again, and it kind of gets you going again. And then he's able to slow it down with another ballad. And I really hate to say ballads because these are slower songs, but I don't think them as ballady. Because they're so personal. Because they're so personal.
When you think of ballad, you think of the heavy production sense, and these songs are very, very simple.
Celine Dion or something like that, exactly. like that type of a ballad. These are more personal songs, and they're down tempo, and they're very sparse. It's like piano. And there's not much to it, so I don't look at it as the typical ballad like Babe or something like that. It's different for me.
Well, interestingly enough, his own song Against All Odds, which was a big hit in 1984, was actually supposed to be on this record. It was written for this album, but it was omitted because he felt there were one too many slow tracks. So that became a hit later on. But that had the heavy, like you say, ballady type production and that kind of thing going on. But yeah, this song, another gorgeous little song. His work,
he knows when to pull it back, and that's what's important. Is he goes for it on the up tempo stuff and puts the horns in, but he doesn't use it to just because like, oh, I've got access to the Phoenix horn, so I'm just going to make sure I get my money's worth. It's used when it's need to. And it's pulled back when it's not, when it needs to really get personal. And then he rolls into another up-tempo song with Thunder and Lightning, which is a great song. I like this song.
Which is one of my favorites.
It's a good Phil Collins song. It's like kind of akin to where he was going, but it's like an early crack at the pop.
I love it. I love the vocal performance on it. He's got that really sort of scratchy, like he starts belting out the lyrics on it. It's not a soft-spoken vocal, especially in the chorus. Some really nice guitar work from Daryl Stuermer on this nice little solo there. So he gave him some love, with that, and I just love when the hand claps come in at the end, and he's just the groove of that. And just, so yeah, another just catchy, another great tune, a little bit slower than Behind the Lines and, Hand in Hand and, but it's great. And then of course
it's still in that vein. It still keeps, you kind of get a little personal song with You Know What I Mean. And then he says, all right, you know what, we're not going to drag you. We're not going to keep that dragging you down like that. Let's get Thunder and Lightning. And then it follows up with I'm Not Moving, which is kind of a short, kind of almost experimental for him where he's playing around and doing all the backing vocals. Right. And kind of, it's kind of like kind of like a little quick hit.
Another underrated song. I love it. To me, it evokes something that Paul McCartney might have done in like sort of like the late 70s. Like Wings, like those last couple of albums that Wings did. So it kind of reminds me of that. And again, it might very well be the case since he was a Beatles fan, huge Beatles fan. So, there's a little vocoder effects. He was using a vocoder for the background vocals on that song, which was kind of odd. But again, like you said, very experimental. He was experimenting with different sounds and textures.
Getting to know what he was trying to capture. Right. And then it moves into If Leaving Me Is Easy, which there's not this is just a song of like atmosphere and feel, because there's not a lot of lyrics. It's barely any lyrics. It's
but
you know, there's not a lot to it. So it's really about the emotion, like I said, like the feel that you get from it, and the less is more aesthetic that he's going for with some of these songs that need it. You know, he's not pile driving you with some of these songs, and he really had a deft touch to understand what stuff needed that extra care, and where he could punch it up and have fun and throw the horns in and keep you involved, but then also give you something like this, which is really, it's a serious song, not much to it, but it is so evocative of just the emotion.
Well, this song, I back in the day, I remember when I first heard it, I flipped over this song. I would play this song probably more than any, believe it or not, any other track on the album. Why? I have no idea. I think it was just the overall sound of it. It kind of, to me, it sounds like an old Philly soul song. Mm-hmm. Like, you think of like, like Me and Mrs. Jones, or, one of those tunes. Like, I love that heavy sense of production back in the day, that lush strings and horns and that kind of thing. That's what I think he was going for. And I think it's his favorite track off the album himself. He said, aside from In the Air Tonight, which I'm probably most proud of, this was probably my favorite song. And when he performed
it's all atmosphere. This song is like atmosphere. It's a feeling. And he does succeed. He's trying to evoke and Me and Mrs. Jones is a great contrast, because that song is a certain feeling to it. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is. He uses stuff sparingly and uses it enough, and that's the whole key.
I was actually, when we went to see him at Radio City, I was so glad that he played it.
He did? I don't remember.
Yeah,
wow.
He did. He did, and I was so happy about that. The story goes, though, is that he had to drop it from the tour because people kept talking, because it's so quiet, and so people were like whistling and like just being like real, and he'd actually get angry. He would like actually yell at the crowd, like, sort of jokingly, of course, but just be like, shut up, like, because he's trying to get through the song, and it's just really personal, like, but it didn't quite fit, I guess, so he had to drop
not for that tour. Yeah. Not especially when he's playing Sussudio.
Yeah.
and like that
kind of my number, and
it doesn't him trying to get the audience to buy in on it when his tour is called Phil Collins and the Hot Tub Club.
Right.
Little difficult when you're going to go hard on something like this. That's emotional. Obviously for him, he wanted to get it across, but if people are getting up and getting T-shirts, you might need to reevaluate.
It's that kind of song.
The last track, for me, is a head scratcher. I listened to it again and I can appreciate it, but I still, maybe it's just the title, or maybe it's his Beatles fandom or fanboy. But he does a cover of Tomorrow Never Knows, which is, we'll say it's very obscure Beatles song from Revolver. It's for the Beatles, it was very experimental. It was a John Lennon vocal. It was the Beatles really kind of pushing the experimental to the edge before they went into Sgt. Pepper and kind of did everything they needed to do, being weird and experimental, and then just kind of progressing their sound and what they could do. And Tomorrow Never Knows, we used a lot of backwards loop tapes with John Lennon and just all the weirdness.
It's a wonder of recording at the time, because they managed to get all of those sounds on 4 tracks. Yeah. Which is amazing.
So Phil took a crack at it, right? Yeah. He pretty much mimicked it. He didn't do an exact duplicate, and you can't really adapt this song to any type of other genre.
First of all, it's very slow. It's much slower than the Beatles version. And Why Tomorrow Never Knows. This was his tribute to John Lennon, who of course had been killed a year earlier. So but Why Tomorrow Never Knows. I don't really know the reason. I know he likes the song. I know the drumming on that album Revolver was big. He was a huge fan of Ringo. He loved the drums on Tomorrow Never Knows. But why he decided to do that, I think it has something to do with the fact, with something like In the Air Tonight opening the album. I think he wanted to have something to kind of close it out.
Yeah, could be
somewhat in the same vein where he's doing all this weird experimental kind of stuff. And he would take like different things and actually hand in hand. It was like he played that backwards. You could hear those voices that gave you chills before, like the kid's voice is slowed down. That's them with that weird like at the very end. It's like, and try playing that song in the dark with the headphones on. It scared the crap out of me the first time I heard it. I wasn't sure if I liked it, but it was an odd choice. He could have picked anything. Why not Imagine? Why not Strawberry Fields or something, one of the more well-known John Lennon songs, but he chose this one, and I applaud him for it. May not be everybody's taste, but I loved it. So
and for me, actually, when I had heard this, I hadn't hit my Beatles period yet. So actually, full disclosure, I heard this version of Tomorrow Never Knows before I heard the Beatles. So I was more familiar with this before, and then a few years later, I would really go full speed head on crashing into the Beatles and then got into it and be like, oh, and then I was making the comparison. So for me, it was kind of like, Tomorrow Never Knows. It's like, okay, it's this weird song at the end and whatever. And it's a Beatles song. Okay. And I still hadn't gotten to that point in my listening journey where the Beatles would become everything all encompassing,
right?
Which happens for most people. So, and then oddly enough, as the song ends though, you can hear him very lightly singing, very gently singing Over the Rainbow at the very end. He closes out the album singing the lyrics to Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, that was his tribute to John Lennon. That's what it was. So, that's what that was about. So closing that, out with that was, his sort of goodbye, his farewell, if you will.
Yeah.
Epitaph, kind of thing. So it was a nice little touch.
And it kind of closes it out. So it definitely gives you something different. It is not anything like everything before, but again, it was in tribute to John Lennon. So if that's the song he connected to, then and he did it justice. He absolutely did the song justice. So there's nothing against the song. It's just an odd choice, and it's an odd duck in this album. Which
I love. Like I said, it perfectly bookends. You got In the Air Tonight and this, and I think it works, and try playing that song loud. Turn that shit up. I mean, it is, and that's when you really you feel it. And especially when he kicks in with the harmony vocals, when he's harmonizing with himself, that's what gets me going. It's like, wow, this is so much sound and so much texture. And it's one of the best things he ever did, like, recording wise, in my opinion. And for an album that is somewhat not overly produced, you could really feel like his stuff is like it most definitely in the forefront. So what he's doing is right there in the front, his piano, his drums, his vocals, and everybody else on the album kind of lets him have that space. They're not overcrowding him with like all these great players and really coming in and overwhelming it with a lot of like heavy production. So it is a very lightly produced record.
Yeah, very smartly produced and very economical is what I'd call it. It's this, when the bass needs to be highlighted, you hear it and you love it. It's there.
It's right on point.
Yeah, it's tasty. It's full sounding, and it's where it's supposed to be in a compliment to the song. So very much so. This album, is very much a departure from the prog sound of Genesis. Probably a lot of head scratching back then. Now we look at it as, this was like the birth of Phil Collins. And my little thing, like I said, I'm a sucker for the bass lines in this song just because they're so prevalent and used so well. So if you love to hear bass in a song, this is your album because it's so clear and it's so done so well and respected. Like you can just hear it. You can hear all the different instruments too. I just really like the way this album was put together, and it just kind of really everything fits. And he was just so brilliant at this. And
but why do you think that is? Why do you think it's because it's all rhythm? He's a drummer, so those instruments like piano, keyboards, drum, bass guitar. Of course, those are going to be in the forefront. Because that's it's the groove of the thing. That's what keeps it going. So
and now we come to 2021, or actually 2020 also, 2020. And Phil Collins, In the Air Tonight has always been around. It's a staple of album oriented rock stations, classic rock station. It's in there. It's always going to be there, but there's a new sensation on YouTube, and it's something called reaction videos. And I watch a lot of reaction videos. There's a reaction video to everything. You could watch someone else. Basically, it's you watching someone else watch something or listen to something, usually for the first time, and getting their reaction to it. So a lot of times I like to watch those because it does help me revisit it again. When I see somebody get excited listening to something that I listen to and I take for granted, and I see them get excited or have an emotional reaction, there is some value. It would sound weird that I'm going to watch somebody watch something else or listen to something else, but it is kind of, it helps you kind of recapture the innocence of it when someone else is hearing it for the first time. So there's a reaction video by a YouTube channel. They're called Twins, The New Trend. That's the name of their channel. And they did a reaction video to this. And of course, with these reaction videos, as soon as that drum segment kicks in, everyone's head explodes. And their reaction video to In the Air Tonight has 8.4 million views. Okay. That's 8.4 million. Probably, I would split the difference. Probably half the people are older people that know it to watch the reaction, but some of them a lot of them are those subscribers that follow Twins, Twins, The New Trend, that are exposed to this for the first time. Because if you go and you look up on YouTube, Phil, In the Air Tonight reaction, you'll see everybody jumped on the bandwagon. Now everybody's doing a reaction. Their mind is being blown when they hear the drum break.
Right.
But Twins, The New Trend really started it and really capitalized on it and really brought, kind of Phil Collins, back into the new century. Yeah. In a good way.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's kind of it's such a strange thing how, it's great how younger people or people that haven't been exposed to this type of music are open to listening to it and let me hear it and let me get a true reaction. And that's where the reaction videos kind of keep it alive.
It's like you said, it's gratifying to see these young kids really get into the stuff. And you could see that, they're genuinely like impressed by this stuff. And it blows my mind. Watching, and it's movies too. Like there's one I watch. This girl, it's amazing to me that she's never seen a lot of this stuff. And so it's kind of weird, but then you kind of take into account how old they are. Yeah. But just watching their faces it's pure joy, and it's
fun,
and it does take you back. It does take you back, and you all you want to do is listen to that stuff again. You want to go back and revisit it.
Yeah, so it's real neat, and it's a great way for these artists to kind of get. Because most people don't listen to the radio anymore, or you're not going to listen to an oldie station. But if you get exposed to it this way, and then hopefully they continue the journey. Why should someone listen to this now? Well, we've seen the power of the reaction video, but why should someone listen to this whole album? Right? It's very easy to go watch the reaction video and see people get excited by it. But what does the whole album have?
Well,
for me, I think it's you go for In the Air Tonight, right? You listen to this album to hear In the Air Tonight, but you stay. The reason why you stay is to hear an intimate album, by someone who's again, you can't judge Phil Collins by Phil Collins now. You have to go back where he was no one knew who Phil Collins was, and him doing this album to kind of get these thoughts and these feelings out in this way. Stay for that and go on and you'll feel how he was feeling.
Well, that's the thing too. It's like it wasn't just him wanting to just make songs about his divorce, and he had a chance, an opportunity, an in, if you will, to really express musically the stuff that he loves. But by writing these songs, they were sort of they kind of went together, and he was able to do both. He was able to kind of tell a little bit about himself, not just about his, what was happening at that point, but going back into his youth. And so it is kind of like a sort of a bit of a journal, if you will, or a tapestry in a sense of his life. This is where I'm at right now, but let me show you what I, dug back in the day. This was me. So it is a very me is all over. If you look at I actually have it right in front of me, the inner sleeve of the album. If you look at it, there's like pictures, like little photographs of like Polaroids that he took. And all I see is me all over this thing. Because this is me. This is what I played. This is what, I'm hanging out with this guy, whatever. So it is a very sort of like almost like a journal. Yeah. It's a journey, and I kind of saw that right away, and I think that's what attracted me to it. Like I said before, it's one of the first records that I cared about what the songs were about. Not just, and of course, it had all those great hooks and all that great music with it, which was a blessing. And so everything just kind of works with this record. Call it what you will. Some people might say, "Oh, it's lightning in a bottle." Is it because he wouldn't quite, for me personally, as a fan, he wouldn't quite recapture the tone of this record with all this other stuff kind of built up, became more and more produced, more and more,
Well, he did go on to bigger and better. So yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that this was the start of something, and he basically was pretty much either between his solo work and Genesis, pretty much almost had something out almost every year of the 80s. I mean, so he's very, very prolific. This really started him on that process and on that path to kind of realizing and doing those things that he loved with his solo work, and still trying, at least at some point before they really lost grip, of maintaining the prog aspects of Genesis, trying to keep those fans happy. But they still also needed to develop, Genesis as a band needed to develop also, and they weren't going to keep doing the same thing anyway. It's a brilliant album. It's really is a great piece of work. It's got so much melodic stuff. It's got just beautiful lyrics. It's got a great vocal performance from him. And like I said, a spine-tingling song for me. So this album will always have a special place in my heart.
Yeah, I agree. But every song for me is spine-tingling. That's how much I love this record.
So yeah, definitely check this out. It's available everywhere, and like I said, it's a really great listen. Highly recommend. I'm going to ask in closing. I'll ask this: like, whatever assumptions you have about Phil Collins, and he does the Tarzan soundtrack, and he did this, and he did the corny videos. Kind of try and back burner that. And I know it's difficult. Try and make like that is a different Phil Collins, and then listen to this album by itself, and I think you'll kind of appreciate where he was at this time before he jumped on the rocket to success, and it took him into the stratosphere. That is Phil Collins. That is Face Value. Again, that came in 1981. So we want to thank you for taking this trip with us on the 3324 podcast. We always appreciate you listening and joining us and giving us your feedback. We've got all the different links on social media, so you can definitely go check us out. For Erik, I'm Dean, and we're going to talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Erik Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.